Right. Knock on wood. And I think sometimes, isn't it?
Now we just have other things wearing out.
Right, right. You know what? I think I could go back to the other. I might not could have breathed. I don't breathe with that sometimes, but,
Yeah, asthma actually, except for the fact that you almost die when you
Yeah.
have an attack, you're fine. You're perfectly fine, except when you almost.
I assume that, isn't Kathy Archibald in our class, but not, I mean, on the week, she was sick on Sundays.
Yes.
I'm assuming she would not be here, or she might be on.
Right. She,
You got no voice.
Yeah, I saw her on Monday. She's, she had a mask on.
Oh,
Uh,
this has been extremely, as all of your classes are, but oh my gosh, extremely
Education.
educational.
yeah, so glad.
This is like one of Wortman's, and as you go home at the end and go,
I was just in seminary for an hour.
I miss his classes so much, but you're doing a great job.
He
And
just got his Christmas card. His kids have grown so much. Oh, my God.
so it's 3 now, right? It's 2 boys and a girl?
Right, 2 boys and a girl.
Yeah, the baby must be 3.
Yeah, he looked, yeah. He's a small child. He's not a
Oh.
toddler anymore.
He's not a toddler. He's a girl into child size.
Miniature one.
Oops.
Who is that? Somebody at home?
Jenny Springer.
Oh.
Hey, Jenny. There
Hello.
you are. We had a lovely view of your composition notebook. Glad you're with us.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Jennifer? Okay, I'm on. Yes, I can hear. Thank you. Bye.
Are you
Thank-
voice? Are you on?
This is on mine because then it's easier for me to share
Gotcha.
PowerPoint.
Oh, gotcha,
So this, you're looking at my screen, that you're looking at this screen.
gotcha. I'm glad you have all that straight.
Well, Cedric did a good job with the.
Yeah, he was-
Stuff Sunday
Yeah,
too.
Yeah.
he did.
He didn't do it with quite as much confidence as he did his, but he did a
got it
great
done.
job. He did a great job. And of course, he brought another beautiful
Yes,
young lady.
yes. Did I just miss, did he introduce her?
He
Maybe
did.
before the thing turned on.
Maybe.
Yes, and I'm terrible with names.
I forgot her name, but I was,
It's-
had other things on my mind.
Of
It
course,
was
yeah.
It's something like Shamika.
something like that, or
Okay.
yeah, it was SH something.
And
Yeah,
it's about that long. It may be Shamika, but it's something.
Yeah, I didn't recognize her as someone that.
Well, I made the mistake of saying, have you been here before? And she goes, no, this is my first time. Okay.
She apparently had
Who are you
Had
talking
the-
about?
the-
that brought these?
So, in our Sunday school.
Santa Claus.
Uh-huh.
She gave him that sweater.
Oh,
So
that's right.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, different conversation.
Okay.
So Cedric is in our Sunday school class and he works for Georgia Power as a trainer or something
I
in
think
the,
so.
and anyway,
And recruiter.
and recruiter, that was it. And so he does a
Stand-up comedy.
little stand-up comedy.
That's his hobby.
Yeah, it's his hobby. I
Uh-huh.
mean, because he says it's like 4-minute things.
Yeah.
So he did us a 15-minute
Oh.
one Sunday. It is hilarious
That's really.
that he did on the book of Luke. Plus a little bit of, he said, this is no way reflects on PCC. This is.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
A little disclaimer, yeah.
Yeah. But
He's really good.
he is
Yes,
very,
I really
Yeah,
good.
he was. yeah.
And y'all, he worked on that. He started prepping it, writing it when I very first asked him. And he's every now and then, he said, okay, I want you to listen to, what I've got so far. And yeah, he put a lot of work into it.
well, I got to introduce him. He was they were buying some nuts or whatever, and we were walking out the door. And ran into Nancy Oliver, and I had some other things to talk to her about. And so I was able to introduce him to her, because we had just been telling him
Hmm.
that you know, that she
About her.
was about her background in acting. And if you ever wanted to, you know,
Yeah,
get her to give him feedback on his present, you know, not presence, but whatever, then she'd be a good person for that, so.
And that Hogwarts. Yes.
oh, yeah.
Oh, and now she's disappearing up the.
Yeah.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi,
Is that Hogwarts?
it is Dumbledore's office.
There you go.
You-
Zoom is creating the illusion that you have the invisibility cloak
Yes.
Yes.
over part of you.
Yeah, it's when it moves.
Yeah, when you lean this
Oh,
way or
yeah.
that way.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah, yeah,
Went too far.
yeah. Yeah, you vanish. It's pretty funny. See, there you go. There you,
Yeah, no.
your arm
Yours
vanished.
Vanished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
Hey, hon.
Hey, hi.
Y'all are getting a view of our dining room. Oh, was that Annabelle? Did I hear
Oh,
Annabelle?
that
Oh,
is
yeah, there's Annabelle.
Oh,
Oh,
Just had to come say hello. and
There you go.
play, huh?
Your attention.
Was everybody ready for Christmas?
Mm,
Have no idea.
Yeah. No.
Not doing much.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not doing- yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are y'all gonna be in town or you going to your mom's?
We'll go up to Bill's mom's for the day,
She's in the Atlanta area, right? Just
Gainesville, Georgia.
things.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's it. Very low key.
Is she still at home or is she? in-
No, she's at Lanier Village, which is a graduated care
Uh-huh.
campus. And she is in, I guess they call it the skilled nursing.
Yeah, so that
They have memory care. She's not in memory care.
but like if she takes meds,
They do it. They do it. Yeah.
We had to move her parents out of independent when she had too many stove fires and mismedicated and things like that. It's
yeah.
a natural thing that happens as you age, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why they have those
Yeah.
levels.
Absolutely. Yeah, we weren't sure if she was taking her meds, taking them all at the same time, not taking them. And even with people coming in and checking, we still don't
You
know.
don't know, yeah.
I had a person coming in and she did a really good job, but what happened is I had to set up the boxes.
Yeah,
And then we had a toolbox, literally a Black and Decker, and it was locked. And she and I,
Were the only keys.
yeah, or we used a code, I've forgotten which it was, but it was such that my mother couldn't mess with it
wow,
because,
Wow.
when
yeah,
She would.
oh yeah, and she had mixed, because you know, so many medicines look similar. And she was on 2 or 3 different kinds of blood pressure, but you know, different times of the day and all that. My dad wasn't on any medications. And he had like a multivitamin, was about it. Well, she mixed a supplement with one of her blood pressure medicines. And you lay them out in your hand, they look very similar.
Mhm.
Anyway, her family doctor caught it. She says, now I want you to bring in the box, don't bring me just the pill bottles. Bring me, and so she done I'm going, oh my gosh, I had not, this is before I got the helper.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I had to start graduating her.
That's kind of, yeah, what we had to do as well. Well, it is, we've got 7 seconds and it'll be 7:05. So, let us open. And Brooks is sharing the screen here. Hey, Santana and Miriam, I see y'all just joined. It's good to see you. So we've got tonight is our final night. As we think about in those days, what was life like in those days when that decree went out and the world into which Jesus was born? And we've talked about, we're going to bring that forward tonight. We're going to move forward in time a little bit tonight. But let's review a little bit.
Yes.
We good?
Yeah, just
Groovy.
three add-ons here.
Groovy, thank you. Welcome, everybody. Welcome.
Got it. Hey,
Ruth's here and
D.
who else is here? Hey, Dee, and Jane
Hello.
Weir is back.
yes,
Jane, I hope you had a good family reunion with the Weatherbees.
it was wonderful.
Yay, I'm so glad. I am so
Surrounded with a lot of cowboy hats and a good two-stepping at the wedding. It was great.
Awesome. Well, let's review a little bit, make sure we remember the critical aspects of the world into which Jesus was born. And remember that we've covered over the last 2 weeks the two major influences that both shaped and ultimately destroyed, that's what we'll talk about tonight, the world into which Jesus was born. And we spent the first week on one of those. And what was that major influence?
Romans.
The Romans, right?
Right.
Roman imperialism. And Santana used the phrase the Pax Romana, right? The peace of Rome, which meant, yes, there's free trade, there's free communication, there's good travel, but it's enforced by the biggest, baddest bully on the block, right? And we had a catchy little alliterative, two-word alliterative phrase for that.
Cosmopolitanism.
Exactly, Dee. Costly cosmopolitanism. And what do we mean when we say cosmopolitanism? Ism, it's a belief. So what is the belief that is cosmopolitanism?
When they're down.
Like Atlanta,
Say that again, Santana?
more or less the transformation of Atlanta from
Yeah.
being
Yes, absolutely. From being a big town to being a major metropolitan city, and perceiving that you are part of a larger world. Key word there, world. You have to actually imagine that there is such a thing as the world, and that you are a politos, a citizen of that world. So you're not parochial, you're the exact opposite. You're cosmopolitan. But we called it costly cosmopolitanism. Why did we call it costly?
Because you now have taxes.
Exactly, literally costly. The Romans, to have all of the things that make for that cosmopolitanism, right? Big cities, roads, that requires infrastructure, and the Romans taxed the living stew out of everybody. They were very lenient otherwise. You could maintain your own religion, your own culture, your own language, your own practices, all of that. They were not like the Hellenists who wanted to make everybody Greek. They were perfectly fine with diversity, perfectly fine with it. As long as you didn't revolt and you paid your taxes, everything was fine. So that was the first major influence. What was the second major shaper of the world into which Jesus was born? We focused on it last week.
Judaism.
Judaism, exactly, Judaism. And I used the adjective multiform Judaism. Some people would even say that there were multiple Judaisms, because there was a lot of diversity of opinion about what it meant to be Jewish. What does that look like? And we talked about some of the various different schools of thought that existed during that time, and looked at how so many of the conversations, particularly the conflict conversations that we hear in the Gospels, are manifestations and giving voice to the conflict and conversations among those different schools of thought within AD first century Judaism. Or you might hear the expression late Second Temple period Judaism, because this is the time of the Second Temple. And it's late because it ain't going to be around much longer. And we looked at how Christianity participated in those conversations, and in fact emerged from those conversations. We saw how John the Baptist and how Jesus were very much so involved in critical discussions of issues that were in flux and in debate at the time. Okay. So what we're going to look at tonight, we're going to look at the intersection of those two influences. Roman imperialism and AD first century Judaism ultimately did not get along. And that's what we're going to look at tonight, because that is really what's going to lead to the parting of the ways. We talked about that, you know, Christianity is one of those one of the participants in that conversation. And yet we're not anymore. We're over here and the temple is across the street. What happened? And we're going to look at how those two influences, Roman imperialism and 81st century Judaism, collide. And out of that, the atom gets smashed and Judaism and Christianity go different ways. So sure, thank you. So remember that Jews have to make some pretty significant concessions to Rome. There is this constant military pressure. And we read last week that very familiar verse from Matthew chapter 5, verse 41. If someone compels you to carry his pack for a mile, carry it too. And that Roman soldiers had standing authority to stop somebody and say, carry my pack for 1 mile. And you can imagine that's a real goad. There's a daily sacrifice in the temple in honor of the emperor. This is, we've covered this, but I want to review it for us. And granted, everywhere else in the empire, that sacrifice was to the emperor. At the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, it is simply in honor of the emperor. And that was a Roman concession to the Jews, yes, but having even to do that sacrifice was a concession by Jews to Rome, even though the emperor paid for it. Rome controls.
Excuse me 1 minute.
Yeah.
Was that a secret that he paid for it?
No.
Or just?
No. It was a testament of the emperor's honoring the Jewish God, which in the emperor's mind was fine because he didn't see that as any different from Zeus or Olympus or Apollo or any of the other, any other or chief gods from any of his other peoples. This is all part of being a cosmopolitan empire. And hey, true for you, true for me, true for everybody. Just don't make any exclusive claims. That was not acceptable socially. Our God is the only God, not acceptable. But the emperor, yeah, sure, I'll pay for it. Rome controlled the high priest who held the office of high priest, and they had physical control of the vestments. So you can imagine, let's say every time we wanted to have communion or hold worship, somebody from the staff had to go to City Hall and get our stuff. Taxes, taxes, taxes. I've had to explain many, many things in 40 years of teaching adult Bible, I have never had to explain to people why people don't like taxes or tax collectors. They seem to get that.
Do the Romans pay taxes too? Or is it just everybody else?
Romans had to pay some taxes, but they were exempt from certain other taxes.
But the other people were not.
Right,
Okay.
right. Yes, you had to pay for the honors of being a conquered people. Yes. And the Jewish people were subject to Roman rule through client kings and military governors of varying competence and also of varying levels of decency and humanity. Some less than others. Next slide. We talked about Herod as one of those client kings, Herod the compulsive builder. He built Masada, Herodium, Caesarea Maritima. He rebuilt large portions of Jerusalem and Judea after a major earthquake in 31 BC. He built that series of wilderness fortresses from Caesarea all the way to Jerusalem. The Jerusalem temple was his magnum opus. It was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It was a vast complex. We talked about that the biggest stones discovered to date are the size of city buses. And I don't mean the little, Clifton corridor vans. And all of that building that Herod is doing was also taxed, paid for by heavy taxation. So remember that it's a pyramid scheme, right? Everybody's got to take their piece of it. There's no IRS, there's no Congress, we have no representation that determines what our taxation is going to be. It's the low-level guy collects taxes all the way up. And when you get to Caesar, Caesar has told everybody underneath him, I need to get this much. I don't care how much more you get, but I need to get this much. And everybody down the pyramid does the same thing. So you can imagine by the time you get to Joe Blow tax collector, we'll just say there's a lot of surcharges attached. Right. Next slide.
One thing, I know that you wouldn't agree with everything that this show is showing, but this week in PBS, in the History Channel, they've been showing some stuff about, anyway, it's all the same topic, and they actually showed the stones. So that was really interesting, some of the remaining ones that they've been uncovering.
Yeah.
It was looking at the lost books of the New Testament, kind of pros and cons. But anyway, it was still interesting.
Right.
And it talked about the Gnostics and some of the others and why some were put in and some were left out. And it related to all of this that you're talking about, the divisions within the church.
Well, those divisions, that's of course later. We don't even have a church yet, right? To be divided. But yes, as we said, some of these conversations are conversations still with us today. We talked about Herod died in 4 BC. We talked about that he was paranoid and ruthless in his later life, that the Emperor Augustus made the joke that it was safer to be his sow than his son. In Greek, it's safer to be his hus than to be his huios, safer to be his sow than his son, because he kept kosher. But he executed 2 of his sons, suspecting them of sedition. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1, we learn about, and following, we learn about his execution of the innocents, right? Very in character for that man. And in his will, he ordered his enemies in Jerusalem to be executed on the day of his death, because he said he wanted somebody to cry when he died. And he leaves his kingdom to his 3 surviving sons. And remember, that when Alexander died, his empire gets divided up among 3 different factions, and that never goes well. Never goes well. And so revolt and unrest results from this carving up. And that's really where we're going to turn our attention now, is there's going to be this constant climate of revolt through Jesus' lifetime. When Herod dies, and like I said, he left a will. And in his will, he divided his kingdom between among his three sons. And Rome decided to honor the will. They were under no real necessity to do that, but they decided that they would honor the will. And you can see from this map, the area of Galilee in the north, Perea, which is north and east of the Dead Sea, went to Herod Antipas. Iturea and Trachonitis go to his son Philip. You can see that is in the upper northeast corner. Samaria, Judea, and Idumea went to his son Archelaus. And Decapolis, which is to the east of the Jordan River and a largely Gentile area, is going to go under direct Roman rule. You may remember that when Joseph is told by the angel that he can go home, take Mary and the baby and go home, because Herod has died, the one seeking his life has died, he hears that Archelaus is ruling in Judea and decides that's not where he wants to go. Archelaus was one of those acorn didn't fall far from the tree kind of guys. So he's settled up in Galilee. So the Herod's kingdom is now essentially divided into 4 sections. And as I said, Archelaus, acorn didn't fall far from the tree. He was problematic and had a pretty disastrous rule. And the so-called Eagle Revolt occurred under Archelaus because he installed images at the temple. And 3,000 Jews were killed during Passover. Remember, we talked about Romans get nervous at Passover. What Passover celebrates a liberation event, the Exodus. And so nationalistic liberation imagination can get a little bit out of control. And so Romans understandably get nervous at Passover, and for good reason. Riots continued while Archelaus went to Rome to try to get support. And these riots seem to have been led by messianic claimants. It took 3 Roman legions to intervene. That's 3,000 of Rome's crack troops. 2,000 more Jews were crucified. And if you read in Matthew chapter 2, verse 19, you'll actually read about this, about the Jews that were killed under Archelaus. Judeans and Samaritans appeal to Rome that this is an excessive response to what happened. And so Rome removes Archelaus from his position as client king in AD 6 and replaces him with a string of prefects, most of them boorish and second rate. When you read the accounts of Jesus' trials, remember that Jesus gets sent to Antipas because the governor in Judea hears that the guy's from Galilee. So he's trying to turf the case. He's saying he's Galilean, so I'm going to turf him to Antipas, who happened to be in Jerusalem because it was Passover, right? He had come to town for Passover. But it was not a Jewish client king in control in Jerusalem. Next slide. Oh, price of rebellion, right? Crucifixion. That's our one piece of evidence, physical evidence of crucifixion. Next slide.
Who was the Roman emperor around that time?
We'll see.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've talked about 5,000. How many people were really, you've talked about 5,000 Jews that were killed between the two numbers,
Yeah.
2,000 and the 3,000.
Yeah.
So what percent of the population? I mean,
Good question.
no idea.
That's a real good question. And how accurate are those numbers?
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot,
Yeah.
a lot. And there was enough truth to it that Rome bought it. The most serious of the revolts happened down in, happened in those four regions, was led by a guy named Judas the Galilean, who is mentioned in Acts chapter 5, and we read that passage, and how it was centered at the city of Sepphoris, which was Herod's tax center in Galilee. It was put down by the governor of Syria, who destroyed the town and crucified 2,000 rebels and enslaved the rest. So you get it, I hope you're getting a sense here. Revolt happens periodically, usually with pretty bad results, but they tend to be contained and limited in scope. Next slide. So when you read in Luke, right, there went out a decree that all the world should be taxed and that Quirinius was governor of Syria. This guy took office in about AD 6. So it's a good while after who has died? Good while after. Who died in maybe about 4 BC? Herod, right. So he's one in a string of rulers. He levied a poll tax in Judea. And Judas of Galilee led a tax protest against that. And it may be at that point that the Zealots were founded. We talked about them as one of those schools of thought, very similar to the Pharisees, except that they are, they're essentially the military wing, right? They really want to break free from Rome. That's their real cause célèbre and their raison d'etre, is to try and get broken away from Rome. And this may be when the Zealots are founded. And it took the high priest interceding to avoid open revolt. So in other words, he convinces the people to calm down. This is consistent. Two things, right? First of all, we know from Luke, there was some sort of enrollment, right? And you can say that it didn't really literally translate taxed all you want. And the bottom line is they enrolled you because they wanted to tax you. It also accords with what we read in the accounts of the crucifixion, right? That it's the high priest, Caiaphas, who says it's better for one man to die than the whole people. That they're very concerned, the high priests, because their establishment, they're tied to the temple, they're in bed with the Romans. It's very much so in their interest to try to quell any sort of groundswell of independence or revolt. Even so, Quirinius learned his lesson, and there are going to be no more enrollments. Next slide. Now, in the 15th year, chapter 3 of Luke, Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, during the high priest of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the desert. So that's who's emperor during Jesus' ministry and at the time of his death. Yeah. Tiberius, yeah. And this really pulls together all of these things that we've been talking about, right? We've got the emperor, we've got an appointed governor in Judea, right? Because Archelaus is out. Herod is tetrarch up in Galilee, that's Antipas. His brother Philip is tetrarch in Iturea and Trachonitis. And there are those Roman stooges, right? The high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas. And then the word of God comes to John, who may have had some sort of relationship at some point with the Essenes that we talked about last week in the desert, right? Because the Essenes and John the Baptist are very dismayed with the temple establishment. So they pull out into the wilderness. Next slide.
So everything that we talked about in the last slide, Tiberius was the Caesar at the time.
Yep. Pontius Pilate. Very recognized name. He was the 5th governor of Judea. The photograph there is a replica of an engraved stone in Capernaum. That is our only physical evidence of Pilate. If you look on the middle line, well, if you look at the top line, Tiberium, that's a reference to Caesar Tiberius. And then you look, there's 2 letters that you can't read, and then what looks like a V and an S. And then you can see it afterwards. You can read it. Pilatus. Pilatus. So probably that what looks like a V, that's actually a U.
Right.
In Latin, was probably Pontius. So it's probably a fragment of his name, Pontius Pilatus. And that's our only physical archaeological evidence of Pilate. Now, there's plenty of written record of Pilate outside of scripture, but that's our only physical reference to him. Jewish sources absolutely scorn him. He brought Roman standards with imperial images.
So you're saying that
The flags, right? The flags with imperial images into the temple by night, which, remember, Augustus Caesar had said, we won't do that. He took temple funds to build an aqueduct. Again, remember that Augustus Caesar had essentially sanctified the temple funds, that they would not be seized by Rome. In Luke 13, chapter 1, get that for us. We hear about something that he did that's very, very consistent with what both Jewish and Roman sources tell us about him. In Luke chapter 13, verse 1, there were some present at that very time who told him, Jesus, of the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mingled with their sacrifices. So he was known for slaughtering people. Shoot now, ask questions later. And this is a recollection in AD 35 he is recalled to Rome. In other words, he's fired in AD 35 after he slaughtered a group of Samaritans at a messianic gathering. In other words, he escalated the situation and should not have done that. Now, messianic expectations are problematic. They're problematic both for Rome and for the Jews. They're problematic for Rome because the most messianic expectations are political and have to do with getting rid of Rome. They're problematic to Jews because there's no Davidic ruler on the throne in Zion and no immediate hope of one. The Zealots believe that there will be a Davidic king who will overthrow Rome. The Samaritans, remember we read the account in the 4th chapter of John, where Jesus encounters the Samaritan woman at the well, and she makes the comment, we know that when this Messiah comes, he will teach us all things. So Samaritans have messianic expectations. The Qumran community, which virtually everyone believes were Essenes, their writings look to 2 messiahs, actually, a priestly Messiah and a kingly Messiah. The Pharisees are looking for the resurrection of the dead and for a Messiah who will restore Israel in a national sense. The Sadducees alone have no messianic expectations. Remember, again, these are the guys who are in bed with Rome, and they also only accept the Pentateuch. So anything, all those beautiful passages about, behold, a virgin shall conceive, he shall be called Wonderful Counselor, they don't believe any of that. They don't accept any of that prophetic material, only the Pentateuch. But this is to say that messianic expectations really are replete throughout the Jewish people, with the one exception of the people who are in bed with Rome. Yet another Jewish revolt is going to break out between AD 66 and 74. It begins in Caesarea over a synagogue easement. Yes, it was a real estate argument. Someone was trying to encroach on an easement that belonged to a synagogue. And they resorted to some violence to try to take control of it and to some bribery. And there was a riot in response to this. Nero, by this time, Nero's on the throne, right? Sends his chief general Vespasian and his son Titus to quell this rebellion. And he does that. They do that. They successfully quell the rebellion. Nero dies. Vespasian goes back to Rome to become emperor. At this time, they're going. Everybody in Jerusalem realizes that Titus is going to finish the job, and Titus wants to make an impression because he's been passed over to be emperor. Christians flee Jerusalem and, according to tradition, went to Pella, the town of Pella. The rabbis went to the town of Jamnia. The rabbis went to Titus and told him, look, we're just a bunch of old religious scholars. We have no interest in a war. And these are our sacred texts, our ancient texts. Can you just let us out of town to preserve our ancient texts? And Titus lets him go. Antiquity respected nothing more than antiquity. And so Judaism was an ancient religion. It was recognized as such. It was a legal religion. Remember, not all religions are legal. And so, fine, you can go. Titus besieged and destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70. They blew up the temple. They poured oil into the limestone, set it on fire, and of course, it literally exploded the building. Until maybe 70 years ago, maybe even less than that, you could find fragments of Herod's temple up to a mile or two away. The explosion had been so powerful. And he makes such an impression that he is able to return to Rome triumphant and to become emperor. And there are just some cleanup operations that end with the surrender of Masada in AD 74. The siege of Jerusalem, how bad was it? Don't ask.
I'm surprised there's enough people left to ride.
Yeah. With all they've killed.
Well, there wasn't anybody
Oh,
in Jerusalem.
oh, okay.
6, that's a 7.
So this is from the Titus Arch in Rome. And this is an incredibly important piece of art here. It clearly documents the looting of the temple, right? They're carrying out a 7-armed menorah. They're carrying out plates that were used to clean the ashes from the altar. So clearly a depiction of booty taken from the temple. The amount of money taken from the temple was vast. No one knows exactly how much, but it probably paid for the building of the Colosseum. It's not over. In AD 133, a guy named Bar Kokhba claiming to be a Messiah, leads a revolt over what was perceived as an order from the Emperor Hadrian forbidding circumcision. Hadrian was one of the first emperors to persecute Christians. And there was a perception that he was also cracking down on Jewish practice. This revolt was supported only by Jews in Judea. Jews in the diaspora wanted nothing to do with it. Christians obviously didn't want anything to do with it. After all, Bar Kokhba is not the Messiah. The Messiah has already come. This revolt is going to end in the absolute obliteration of Jerusalem. There's not going to be one stone left on top of another, and Jews will be completely driven out of Judea. Rome has had it. Some of you may remember I taught when we look at the parable of the wicked tenants, and we talk about the life situation of that parable, this idea of tenant farmers in Judea, that ends completely with the Bar Kokhba revolution. There's no more tenant farmers in Judea after that. It's simply not the way the world is anymore.
And that's the man's name, Bar Kokhba.
Bar Kokhba, right? It meant son of Kokhba. In a very real sense, this is the destruction of the world into which Jesus was born. It's not going to exist in any shape, form, or size anymore. Rome will eventually rebuild Jerusalem as a Roman city and call it Aelia Capitolina. It will be a thoroughly Roman city with an arena, theaters. The road system will be laid out in perpendicular grids, Carta Maxima, Carta Minima, the byways and the highways, completely as a Roman city, completely unrecognizable as a Jewish city. Now, to give you an idea just how serious the Bar Kokhba revolt was, these are coins minted under the Bar Kokhba government. So this was not just some little riot. They actually managed to establish themselves as a quasi-government and start minting money. And look at the coinage. Notice these are two sides of the same coin. Notice that the side that you see on the left is the temple with the Ark of the Covenant inside. And the coin on the right seems to be the flowering staff that Moses had that was inside the Ark of the Covenant.
Where was the ark all this time? I mean, in all these destructions and.
It's not there.
So this is
Yes.
just
This is
fiction.
this is messianic hope.
Okay.
Yeah. No one knows where the Ark of the Covenant is, except Indiana Jones, and he lost track of it.
Right.
Now it's in a secure and undisclosed government warehouse, right? Right.
Did it probably disappear with?
We don't know. Some
What
people
time?
think Jeremiah took it to Egypt.
Oh.
Some people think it is actually still buried somewhere in the Temple Mount. We don't know. We do not know where it is. It is, ironically, the Ark of the Covenant is the Holy Grail of that era, right?
But it's not really mentioned in the New Testament.
No, because it's not in,
It's gone.
it's not in the temple anymore. Yep. Now, okay,
You know
Jerusalem.
that he was taken to Ethiopia? And they
so
still
right, that's a very good, yes, Ethiopian Christians claim to have, that they have the Ark. And the only person who goes in to see it is, I'm not sure if they call him a metropolitan but basically the Archbishop of the Ethiopic Christian Church. Yeah, he's the only person that goes in to see it. They claim they have it.
Currently.
Yes. Thank you for
Thank you.
reminding us of that, Santana. Thank you. So, okay, Rome's destroyed us. But now wait a minute. We're Jews. This is not our first rodeo, right? We were in Egypt, first superpower of the world, and we marched out of there. Assyria destroyed the northern kingdom, but they were eventually destroyed. Babylon destroyed the southern kingdom, exiled us, but they were eventually destroyed. Persia let us go home. Okay, those Greeks came in, tried to expunge us. That didn't work out. Rome conquered them. Maybe this isn't the end of the story. It was, in fact, very reasonable to believe that somebody would liberate Jerusalem and Judea from the Romans. This is the empire under Titus, the eastern part of the empire. And you can see the Roman provinces of Syria and Judea. And you can see to the north and the east what the Romans called Regnum Parthicum. Regnum means kingdom or rule. The Parthians had a formidable empire to the north and east of the eastern bounds of the Roman Empire. They did not like Rome being there. They had had historic claims in Syria. You notice that they have the Mesopotamian Valley. They've got the Euphrates, right? They've got that wonderful, lush area. That means they've got agriculture. They can house horses easily. The northern Syria, the Romans were able to sustain elephants. It's such good pasture land up there. So they've got money, and that's what you need to march on an empire. So it was not an unreasonable thought that the Parthians might fairly soon overthrow Roman rule in Syria and Judea. What do we do in the meantime? Remember that we talked about these foci of Judaism, these points of identity, and people disagree within Judaism. Where are we in terms of what is our Torah? What is our scripture? What do we think of oral traditions? What are our practices? How serious are we about them? What about the temple and sacrificial cult? How important is it? But these foci are going to really define conversation in the wake of the destruction of the temple. Jewish scrolls as canon. Remember, those rabbis are going to want to preserve the scrolls. And this is a facsimile of the great Isaiah scroll, the shrine of the book, that is at the shrine of the book in Jerusalem. So those scrolls are going to be of central importance to Jews in the wake of the destruction of the temple. By contrast, Christians are going to embrace a new technology, the Codex, which is the most ancient ancestor of the modern book. You can see, I think you can see, there's a seam in the middle of that page that you're looking at. I think you may even be able to see the holes. These were made of papyrus, usually, sometimes of vellum, and they were sewn together like a book. They were much easier to carry than scrolls. The great Isaiah scroll is 40 feet long. Isaiah is just, right? It's not even an inch thick in here. Right? Look at the difference. Here's Isaiah. You can pack a lot more into a codex than you can into a scroll. The Christians are going to embrace this technology very, very early. Jewish scholars are going to retain their scrolls. Both groups are going to have new texts. For Jews, the new text is going to be the Mishnah, which is going to start being written down probably around AD 200. But it's simply a collection of rabbinic teachings from the late Second Temple period. That's what it is. Now, notice something. The New Testament, the Gospels, arguably, are simply a collection of rabbinic teachings from the late Second Temple period. I want to point that out. It's just it's a specific rabbi, Rabbi Yeshua, right? Rabbi Jesus. It's the same thing. It's just one rabbi. The church is also going to start writing new texts, those Gospels that are collections of rabbinic teachings from that AD, late Second Temple period. But they're also going to include these occasional letters or missives by leaders of the movement, people like Paul and Peter and James. And when we say occasional missives, so they have some authority, they're fairly lengthy sometimes, and they are occasional. They are written in response to a specific problem. So these are, I will say, more living texts than simply writing down what rabbis used to say. So we're starting to see some differences, both in the form, the physical form that the writings are being preserved, and in the nature of any new writings that are emerging.
The word Mishnah?
Yes.
Sorry to back up
Sure.
into that.
It's just a name.
Okay.
And it simply refers to this collection of rabbinic teaching from that time. You may also hear the term Talmud.
Yeah.
Mishnah is part of the Talmud.
But those are not part of those are separate from the Septuagint or whatever.
Correct.
I mean,
They're not the Bible.
They're not
They're
the
not the
Bible.
Hebrew Bible. They're rabbinic. The Mishnah is rabbinic teaching from that period, that late Second Temple period. And it is the earliest, is the earlier portion of the Talmud. The Talmud also contains a section called Gemara that are commentaries on the rabbinic teachings. So it's application. Same way Christians are doing application. Paul is just doing application of Torah. But it's a little more backward looking. The issue of purity is going to emerge as a distinguishing characteristic. It already had, right, under Jesus. Jesus and his disciples didn't necessarily follow the purity laws as strongly as some people wanted them to, right? That's one of the points of contention. And Christians are going to take the attitude that because there's no more earthly temple, purity laws are no longer relevant. The Gospel of John tells us about, preserves the miracle of turning water into wine. The water was in stone jars, John tells us, like you see here in this picture. They would be about 20, 30 gallon jars. They're huge.
So carry.
And you would use that water to become ritually pure, to wash yourself, so that you could then participate in the temple cult. One of the reasons that the early church preserves this story is because for them, it made the point that we don't need ritual purity. Jesus provides us with our purity. There's no temple. Jesus provides us with our purity. Christ's coming supplants those purity laws. So the church really wants to preserve that story for that reason. By contrast, 33% of the Mishnah, a third, is focused on sacrifices and purity, even though there's no temple. Why do you do that? Why would you preserve a huge chunk of material about how to do sacrifices and how to be ceremonially pure when there's no temple? Why would you do that? That's a serious question. Why?
You want to bring it back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. There is a
So
hope for a
purity-
restoration of the temple. Say that again, Santana?
Yeah, I have a question. Purity
Sure.
refers to diet and, cleanliness of the body, or what is it exactly? What
It's
comprises it?
Right, that's a great,
Purity.
remember, there's no concept of cleanliness like we have. No concept of sanitary. It is simply a matter of ritual purity. And in Jewish
Okay.
law, to be ritually pure, to go into the temple, you had to immerse yourself in what was called living water. In other words, it was flowing water or water that had been caught from a flowing source. The Essenes, remember, were unique that they introduced the idea of purity of heart as well. They were unique in that, and John the Baptist reflected that. So yes, we have two totally different concepts of purity, and they're rooted in the fact that one group thinks the temple is irrelevant, and one group is looking for the temple to come back. The worship spaces are going to start to be different. Jewish worship spaces are going to have a Torah niche, and which is to say a place where those holy texts are kept. And this, you see on the left, you see that Torah niche. That's a model of a synagogue at Dura Europos, which is in Syria. And then the depictions on the wall are murals, wall paintings of stories from the Hebrew Bible. By contrast, Christian worship spaces, what's literally in the middle of that picture?
Cross.
That's in the wall. What's in the middle of the picture?
The table.
Altar. Oh, the
table.
The cross.
A table.
The table. I was going to call it an altar.
Yeah, yep, exactly. The altar, the table. Because the central act of Christian worship from very early on is communion. So we have now two very different things being the central activity of worship, and worship spaces are being built to reflect and accommodate that.
So what year are we probably in right now?
We're moving into, early 2nd century, late 1st century. That's just sort of a close-up to see of the worship space. We see that Moses parting the Red Sea. We see the temple depicted there in this synagogue. Again, hope in a restored temple. And I meant to mention, and I should have, I didn't bring it out like, go back. No, go back. Maybe that's back. Is that back? No.
Well, the Christians probably didn't have as much money to do.
It's sort of a myth, a longstanding myth that Christianity was poor people. That's not true. Pretty early on, they're very wealthy people.
Well, and so in those Christian worship spaces, they didn't have the Torah. Most of them didn't have it available.
We'll talk about
Okay.
it. I meant to mention, and I totally forgot this, sorry. I did say this, but I want to bring it out more. The Bar Kokhba revolt that ends in the absolute destruction of Jerusalem. Judean Jews are going to remember that Christians did not support them. Christian worship space has a real limit on it from the beginning, that they're housing an illegal religion. You can't build a church if you're an illegal religion. You can have worship space, inside existing buildings that you keep on the QT, but you can't build a church. This simply shows this is a 3rd century church, but when you look at it, if you take a quick glance, it looks like a Roman household. A courtyard, some public space, some private space, a baptistry, reflecting the fact that Christians met in homes originally. The most famous one certainly being Peter's house in Capernaum, that has been excavated extensively over the last probably 50 years. At the center of the current excavation that's now, it's covered by a Lutheran church is up on top of it. And you can, it's got a glass floor, so you can see the excavation underneath. At the center of the church, excavators have found what was clearly a house church. And clearly was a AD 1st century house with a room that became venerated very early. Clearly the room that the church remembered is where Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law. Right? And then it's going to get modified to accommodate crowds coming there to worship. But this is simply to point out, Christians are worshiping in homes. They're not worshiping in synagogues. Christian mosaics are going to depict different things than Jewish mosaics are going to be depicting. Christ as the Good Shepherd is going to be a common theme. That's actually appropriated from the design from some pagan mythology, simply reinterpreted by Christians as Jesus as the Good Shepherd. And then we're going to see things like the loaves and fishes, that mosaic floor at a church in Tabgha, which is traditional. It's in Galilee. It's the traditional site of the miracle of the loaves and fishes. Yeah. But we're going to see stories from the New Testament. We're going to see things that depict Christian worship in Christian mosaics. Jewish mosaics are going to continue to depict, well, stuff from the old temple. Ark of the Covenant, clearly a hope that it would be found. Menorah, shofars, incense shovel, a lulav and etrog, things that were used in Jewish worship. Right? Again, that hope for the temple. So ultimately what happens is that Jews and Christians come to a very different answer to the question, who are we without a temple? Remember that James was seen regularly in the temple? The temple had continued to be important to Christians. So who are we without a temple? Jews answer the question with the hope that God will restore his temple, and they act accordingly. Notice that the Pharisees are the only group left after the destruction of the temple and of Jerusalem, right? The Sadducees there's no temple, right? So there's nowhere for them to be the high priest anymore. The Zealots are all dead. Those were the guys leading the revolution. And the Essenes, God bless them, evidently they're all dead. The only thing that was left of them was their library that was found in 1947. The Pharisees are the only ones left standing. And so their way of thinking is what's going to shape the answer. Emphasis on our texts, on interpreting and applying our texts. That's what it is to be Jewish. That had been their answer before the destruction of the temple, and it's going to serve them well in the wake of the destruction of the temple. They're not really dependent on a temple. They are going to avoid cities. They don't want to be on anybody's radar. They are going to focus on Hebrew texts in Hebrew. The Mishnah will be written in Hebrew, except for a little portion in Aramaic. They will worship in synagogues. They will pray for the restoration of Israel. They will pray for a Messiah who is yet to come, and they will assiduously avoid ties with suspected rebels. By contrast, Christians are answering the questions very differently. Christ and his church are the temple. What do you mean we don't have a temple? We have a temple. Don't you know that you are the body of Christ? You are the temple. Edify each other. That's a building term, right? Edify, build up. They're increasingly Gentile. More and more Gentiles are coming into the church. They're increasingly urban. Paul always goes to cities. Remember, the Pharisees are avoiding cities. Their texts are Greek. Remember that the translation of the Hebrew Bible that they have in front of them is the Septuagint in Greek. That their collection of teachings of their first century rabbinic, late Second Temple rabbi, the Gospels, are in Greek. All their letters are in Greek. They meet in house churches. They pray not for a restoration of the temple, but for the parousia. Parousia, fancy word for the second coming. That's the Greek for the second coming. They believe that a Messiah has already come, and they worship someone who is executed as a Roman rebel. There's the divide right there. I hope you can see from all this what I have meant when I've said two great forces, both defined and ultimately destroyed the world into which Jesus was born. Roman imperialism on one side and 81st century Judaism on the other. They're going to clash, just like in an atom smasher. And out of it are going to come these two very different groups. Ironically, who had been part of the same conversation. But even so, I hope that we can remember that we both, Jews and Christians, still occupy a cosmopolitan world with Jerusalem, for both of us, at its center.
Well, so the picture in the upper right,
Yes, that's
Okay.
the Dead Sea. Jerusalem is,
Okay, with a boat.
is the oval below with a road running right through it. That's what it,
Romans did.
that's what the Romans did. And in the center of the oval underneath, quote, underneath the road, is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Questions, comments? I know I've thrown a lot at you tonight
This is
and for
a
3
lot.
weeks.
This really brought stuff together. It's,
Yeah, it did.
Good.
That's a lot.
I'm gonna go back and listen to all of these again.
Uh-huh. Good that we can.
Wow, yes, and to have the slides.
Slides, yeah, yeah.
So if you taught this again, or when you taught it before, did you do it in 3 days?
Did it in one morning.
Oh, my gosh.
And then we went and saw the exhibit in the afternoon.
Here or some, or
No, this was like 2008, 6, somewhere there. But Emory, the Carlos Museum had an exhibit.
okay.
And you've seen everything that was in the exhibit, the
Okay.
slides. And so we laid it out in the morning in lecture format, and then we went and had the lab in the afternoon.
So you've added to ours. It's-
Yes.
We didn't have the lab.
Yeah, there is, you've gotten actually more material. Yeah. Yeah. So it didn't do quite as much. Yeah. Questions? Well,
I have a
Amanda.
question concerning the
Let's see,
Why
Atlanta,
virus?
okay, go
why
ahead,
vi-
Santana.
Yeah, why virus destroyed Sepphoris if it was basically a Roman city built with Roman standards, it's, beautifully decorated, and during the revolt was is there where the Jewish had taken refuge, or what reason?
Right, that's a great question. So remember, Jerusalem is a city on a hill. It is defensible. And the walls had not been destroyed. So it was a defensible location. And it was the center of where the Bar Kokhba revolt had set up their power base. And it was also symbolic. Rome decided that having destroyed the temple in AD 70 clearly had not done the trick.
No, but I mean,
yeah.
Sepphoris. Sepphoris was that town in the
Oh,
first lesson, right?
right. And I'm sorry, say you've broken up a couple of times. So say the question again about Sepphoris.
No, the question is why it was destroyed by virus. I guess it was during the time of
Right, because that revolt was centered there at Sepphoris. That was a tax center for the Romans in Galilee, and that was where that revolt had centered. Yep.
I see.
Yep. Good question. Amanda, you had a question.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So when the Gospels were written, was there any, and with all the politics that was going on, was there an attempt to try and destroy them, or they had to keep them in secret, or how'd that all go about?
Great question. There were so few Christians. Writing those Gospels didn't get anybody's attention. Especially Mark certainly got no attention. He's clearly writing to a persecuted community. So would they have tried to keep their identity secret? Perhaps. But at that point, that community has already experienced incredibly serious betrayal and slaughter. It's I think it's important, I think, to understand when the New Testament, especially when Mark talks about forgiveness, he's probably talking about forgiving members of the community who ratted. And so they didn't get killed.
It's kind of like the Nazi.
Yeah. By the time Luke is writing, so maybe as much as 20 years later, 15, 20 years later, he's writing to someone that he calls most excellent Theophilus. And that implies someone with a government job, a high-ranking government job. One of the things that Luke tries to do in his writing, and we haven't really touched on this in our Sunday morning study, but one of the things that Luke tries to do is prove that Christianity is a true manifestation of Judaism, because Judaism is a legal religion. As long as we're part of Judaism, we're legal. If we are perceived as somehow separate from Judaism, then we get none of those protections anymore, including we are not allowed to meet. Again, freedom of assembly, not something that the Romans gave.
So is that more of a just from practicality that he probably tried to keep that line going?
Luke?
Yeah.
Well, we don't know. But what we have is what we have. But it ends, right, with Paul under arrest. The 2-volume work, Luke Acts, ends with Paul under arrest. And you're kind of pulling for Paul. by the time you get to the end of that book. So from a reader response theory, you might say that Luke sets it up to try and get Theophilus to be sympathetic to anybody who's in chains because they're Christian. Yeah. It's a good question, Amanda. Yeah,
Ask him when we see him.
exactly, exactly, exactly. Anything else?
Mary Elizabeth, do you know how many other gospels were written that were rejected by the council in Nicaea? I guess I know Mary and Judas probably wrote something.
So quite a few gospels were not what we would call non-canonical gospels were floating around by that time. Probably as many as 5 or 6 non-canonical that we know about. I would say it's not so much that they were rejected as they failed to be accepted.
Right.
And remember that there's no the Council of Nicaea and later councils that will talk about that will raise the issue of canon are never going to say you may not read the Gospel of Thomas. You may not read the Acts of Paul. They simply say that these will not be read in worship and they will not be considered normative. I think a lot of times today we tend to hear, we hear about these non-canonical gospels and we think of them as having been repressed. We really have no evidence for that. Not only that, how would you do that? And it's also, I think, important to look at it from sort of a flip side. If you want a group to cohere, you'd better keep the requirements for membership very, very short list. The more things that you start to say, and you have to believe this, and you have to believe this, and you have to believe this, eventually more and more people are going to say, nope, 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 nope. So keeping that short list of canonical books was actually an effort to include as many people as possible. Everybody agrees on these, great. We'll say these are the normative books to read in church. Some people over there, they like the 2 big contenders, really the only 2 books that were contenders that didn't make it were The Shepherd of Hermas and the First Letter of Clement. Those really are the only 2. And the church's attitude was, yeah, sure, you want to read those, that's fine. That's fine. This group over here accepts those. This group over here doesn't. This group over here likes it. That's fine. But we're not going to make everybody buy into those. We're not going to make everybody toe the line. So I think it's important to remember that keeping that canonical list short was actually an effort to preserve, I'll use very anachronistic terms, inclusiveness and diversity. So.
This history program I was talking about gets into that and then talks about within each of those, which group, like the Essenes or whoever, why they didn't buy into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Do y'all ever look at the channel? It's the Story Channel. I was looking at it earlier and I'd seen it before, but they were investigating under Jerusalem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And mostly it was rooms and parts of rooms, and they're speculating about what they meant. But that's a good series, and that story has several different, I'm trying to say, they'll talk about one thing first hour and then something else. But it's really interesting, and I was looking at it before I came here. And they were underneath some places and found water and
It-
rooms and,
If you own real estate in Jerusalem, the Antiquities Department of the state of Israel has the right to dig. Because, I mean, it's layers and layers of occupation. People think they go over here and I walked today where Jesus walked. No, you walked about 30 feet above where
right,
Jesus walked. You got to dig down a ways. But yeah, it's, some people, they have a home in Jerusalem and they have a museum underneath.
yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievable layers of history there. So, anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you. Go in peace to know that Jesus was a particular person, born at a particular time.
Thank you.
And
Thank
in
you.
particular-
Very-
You're welcome. In particular circumstances. And that in doing that, he and God through him embraced everyone's particular place and particular time and particular circumstances, including ours and yours today. So go in peace.
Thank you
That's
so
good.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being part
Yes,
of this.
thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Elizabeth.
Yes, indeed. Be safe
Okay, I'm good. I'm good.
and careful.
Merry Christmas.
Anybody want any cookies?
Oh, I'm gonna do one. Those were,
Oh, good.
well, you want the last dark chocolate?